This is Dance Studio 411, where we answer your real-life questions about your toughest studio life predicaments. Parent problems, teacher turnover, student challenges, policy dilemmas, and so much more. Let's talk about what's keeping you awake at night and what you can do about it. Here are your hosts, Suzanne Blake Garrity and Jill Tyrone.
Welcome to this episode of the Dance Studio 411 podcast. I'm Jill Tyrone, and in this episode, I'm sitting down to have a very frank, open conversation with Amelia Fazio. Our topic today is dance and body image and how you can develop a positive and supportive studio environment. The goal of this episode is to keep it real. Amelia and I have a true heart-to-heart, and we hope this outlines how important body positivity and positive language practices are to your studio. Amelia joined the Revolution team in 2021 after spending a lifetime in the world of dance. Amelia began her dancing career at the age of 5 at the East Coast Dance Theater. She had the privilege of studying with some of the industry greats and at the Sarasota Ballet and the Virginia School of the Arts. After her brilliant dance career, Amelia attended the University of South Florida and graduated with a BA in Public Communications. She combined her love of dance and support of the arts and started her career working at several Atlanta area not-for-profit organizations. Prior to joining Revolution, Amelia worked in the apparel industry and eventually found her niche in the dance costuming and dancewear area. She has a true passion for understanding the needs of the dance studio owner. Amelia occasionally guest teaches and choreographs for studios in the Atlanta area, and in her spare time, she loves to garden and hike our national parks. Amelia is thrilled that her career path combined her love of dance with her passion for business, and she hopes to continue improving our industry long into the future. I can't wait for you to listen to this episode with Amelia because her passion shines through in all she does. So let's get started and dive into this wonderful conversation so you can be inspired to create a studio environment where everybody feels welcome. Hi, Amelia. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today and talk all about this wonderful topic that is so near and dear to us.
Hi, Jill. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about it as well. I think it's a really important topic for our industry, and I can't wait to dive in.
Awesome. So I read your bio, so they already have a nice understanding of who you are, but I always like to ask in your own words, why don't you tell our listeners today more about your background and a little bit more of the personal history about where you've been and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. So like many of us, I grew up dancing and just surrounded by the dance industry. My little fun story is that my parents took me to see the Nutcracker when I was 5 years old. And I was so enamored by what I was seeing on stage that I did not sit down the entire time. The whole hour drive home, I talked nonstop. And that was just a truly defining moment in my life because who at 5 years old decides what they want to be when they grow up and they're actually serious about it, ever since just being surrounded by the dance industry and understanding that I wanted to be a part of it as part of my professional career was something really special to me. So I like to tell customers that I've been on the costuming side of the business since 2012, and hopefully it's given me a whole different wealth of experience to be able to share with our customers.
That's amazing. I love the fact that the Nutcracker pretty much changed the trajectory of your life and your career. It's wonderful.
Yeah. One of the reasons that I was so excited when you approached me to talk about this today is because this is a topic that is truly personal to my heart. And it's something that I feel we just don't discuss enough in the dance industry. I think we do, but there's a lot more important conversations that we can have around it. And so we'll dive into body positivity and body neutrality and what all that means and how we can implement messaging in a safe space in our studios in a little bit. But the main thing is that Jill encouraged me to open up and share why this topic is so important to me and what I feel that my experience can maybe bring to all of you in your approach with your students. So I want to tell you a story about the day that I stopped dancing. And it's a day that I will never forget. So, as some of you've gathered, I was a lifelong dancer focused on ballet and modern. I was blessed to dance professionally for a very short amount of time until an injury definitely sidelined me. And it was an injury that was pretty hard to come back from, but I was really doing my best. So I had spent 6 months doing rehabilitation and all sorts of things and really was unable to be active in the dance classroom. So what happens when you're used to dancing 10 or 12 hours a day and you stop doing that? And you're just in, doing physical therapy and things. Well, I got a little bit out of shape, from what I was before. So during that time, luckily my parents had the foresight to basically force me to apply to college. And, many of you know that back in the earlier days, that wasn't necessarily the plan for a serious dancer. So going to college kind of felt like a backup plan to me, which now I realize it was one of the best things. But at that time, it was a little bit difficult. So I went in for the first day of classes. I was still recovering. I had a brace that had metal clamps on it. It was literally from the middle of my thigh to the middle of my calf. And yet I was just so excited to be back in a ballet classroom. And that was a moment, though, where I started looking in the mirror and I really couldn't help noticing that the image in the mirror did look a little bit different than it had months and months prior. And I was standing there, comparing myself to some of the other dancers in the classroom. And to be honest with you, I didn't feel very good about myself. I felt kind of ugly. And it was a great thing to be back in the classroom, but at the same time, it was a little bit jarring because it had been a long time. I went to a college dance department where I was with quite a few of my peers that I had danced with in one capacity much of my life. So these were many, many dancers that I knew. And at the end of the class, the teacher said that they needed to break the class into two, that it was a little bit too large. So they were going to take this highest level of dancers and split us off and put a separate group in an even higher, more advanced level. So after class, the teacher went around and started calling names to move up into the highest level. And she called several of my peers, and of course, I was really, really happy for them. And her eye kept moving around the classroom until finally it rested on me. And she paused a long while, and she looked me up and down. And in front of about 40 of my peers, she said, "Never mind." And there has never been a time in my life where I felt more worthless than in that moment. I felt like all those years of training and hard work were distilled down into that moment and that perspective that my body wasn't good enough. So I walked out of the dance classroom that day. I walked out with all the other dancers. I walked into the locker room. I grabbed my things. But the difference was I walked out while they stayed. And I actually did not step foot in a dance studio again after that day for 6 years. Looking back, some people I think might say that it was cowardly or that I gave up, and maybe that's true. But I can't go back in time and change my actions. I also can't go back in time and change the teacher's actions or her words. But hopefully, by starting this conversation and by me sharing a story, which I am sure many other people in our industry have, we can shed real light on actually changing the future.
Amelia, you are so brave to share that with us. And I am so glad I encouraged you to have this conversation with me because it's not an easy one. And you are 100% spot on, knowing that you are going to help people today in our conversation, because you are not alone. And things like this has happened. They've happened to me. They're going to have happened to the listener over in Columbus, Ohio, and all the way over to Los Angeles, California. We're going to touch lives today. And this is why this topic is so important, because we can impact the lives of students everywhere with simple things like language. And I don't mean that the languaging, it's not simple. What I mean by just how we approach things and how we say things can truly impact a career, the way we feel. It is so important. So I'm going to take a nice big breath here, and we're going to say thank you, Amelia, for sharing your story today. So with that, let's get into the content that we have, because we're going to now talk about how we can truly change lives by how we say things, how we approach things in the studio.
Yeah.
Let's first talk about body positive language. Let's define it. Let's talk about what it actually is. We've already heard why it's important, but let's now start really diving in about why it's so important beyond simply talking to a student, because we have some really nice, intricate ways that we're going to approach it that I know our listeners really haven't even thought about yet. So let's talk about the definition of body positive language and what it is to you and what we can help share with the industry.
Yeah. So obviously our conversation is going to be steered today around costume and dance wear choices, because as a costume and dance wear vendor, that's definitely our focus. But we want to dive into body positivity and what we mean by that. And there's a couple terminology phrases that we can use. So fun fact, the original concept of body positivity actually started in the 1960s. And it was a group of activists who were actually focused on equality. So, for example, think about seating in an airline for someone that may be a different size. And they were really focused on the marginalization of people's bodies and wanting to ensure that there were equal opportunities and treatment for everyone, regardless of size. So, that phrase has maybe been distilled down a little bit over the years and even misunderstood. But the main thing to take away from body positivity and what we mean by that is that every one of your dancers, every one of the children that steps foot in your classroom should learn to love their body for what it is every single day in the classroom and on stage. There's a concept of body neutrality, meaning that it doesn't always involve loving your body, but it's more about being accepting of your body. And so, in my humble opinion, body neutrality really is the first step towards actually getting to the place where your student loves their body for what it is. But regardless of the phrase you use, the whole idea here is that we want to teach children to be accepting of their bodies. One of the things that I really just want to reinforce is that it's really developmentally normal for children and teens to experience some body insecurity. I think we can all attest to that. We've all been there. The issue is when that body insecurity and that poor body image that they have leads them to withdraw socially or withdraw from activities like dance, or even just withdraw in the classroom. So maybe become quiet and withdraw from some of the normal outgoing personality aspects that student may have. So one of the things that I think is really sad, actually, is that some studies actually say that as many as 1 in 5 children stop participating in an extracurricular activity like dance because of that body insecurity and feeling like they're forced out of that activity, either by how they feel about themselves or the image that they have of themselves, or by the words or actions of their peers or teachers.
Amelia, I'm so glad that you bring data and stats. You know, I'm the data girl, and I know that you love to pull research and look at things. So not only are you speaking from a personal perspective and having to try to come back from an injury, and then having that, first and foremost, just injuries in itself are really difficult to come back to, and then having something like that happen to you. But we can actually pull data from the industry to show that we have students and children who are being affected by what is happening out there. So thanks for bringing the research and the data to the table. It's really important. Let's talk a little bit about how we can now transfer this into the actual classroom. So we speak a lot about core values at Dance Studio Owner and at Revolution. It's really important to establish core values for your dance studio because it gives you a compass and a guide to north and to keep your true north. And then you can transfer that down to how you speak to your faculty and staff, and then what you want them to actually instill into your studio and spread the joy and your core values that way. So I think it's really important to start with your core values, and maybe we can start to even put some body positive language into core values so that it really becomes studio wide, not just what the studio owner wants to see happen or make happen, but actually how it can be spread through the entire studio. So let's jump in and how we can bring this into the actual classroom.
I love that point that you just made, because I think the most important thing to take away is that it really starts at the top down. So the studio owner is such an important piece in this to ensure that all of your staff uses the proper language and starts to reinforce the positive language and the reinforcing language. So, to be honest with you, Jill, and you know this to be true as well, that, in working with thousands of studio owners over the years, sometimes we hear some language, that leads to maybe some uncomfortable conversation. So I think the first takeaway that we want you all to leave with today is just to be aware of what you're saying and how you're saying it, or even the way that you're looking at some of your students. Inevitably, you are going to have a class of dancers where you feel like you need to choose a costume around one dancer or more dancers. And it really might affect your choices. It might affect your budget. But we want to make sure that you leave today empowered, where you're not calling attention to that student's, their size or their height or their skin color, and that you're making sure that your wording with your staff and your teachers also reflects those core values that Jill, you were talking about. Even saying things like, oh, well, they're just our rec kids. Let's transform how we think about that, because they're not just rec kids. They are just as valuable as your team dancers or your competition dancers. And so I think there's a lot of work that we can do around reframing our language.
I love that. The first step, everybody be aware. And we know we live in times where we have to be more aware than ever when it comes to our languaging, because times have changed. They're much different than when I grew up. That's for sure. Thank goodness they're different. It means we're growing.
Yes.
Yeah, it means we're growing. It means we're changing. It means we are moving in directions that we've never been in before. So that's why we're here. We're not here to call anybody out or, make you feel bad for things that you have been saying in the past. This is just to be very aware so that you can create an environment where everybody feels welcome and everybody feels extremely comfortable in their own skin and certainly in their dance wear and costumes. Okay, so I love this next point that we're going to talk about, Amelia, and that's talking and looking at what happens in the process first. So why don't we go on and talk about styles of dance and things like what can we do to really start?
How do we start? Yeah. So one of the things that I want to really talk about is starting these positive conversations at the very beginning of the season. This is not something that needs to start when it comes time for costume selections. And one of the things that I think is really important is giving your students a feeling like they have a stake in this. So what do I mean by that? One of the things I'd really like you to consider is starting a costume worksheet. So at the beginning of the year, when you're already doing things like your orientation and you're getting everybody used to being back in class, why not develop a worksheet where you talk about the artistic elements of what they're going to experience that year? And that can include costuming. So that worksheet can include everything from asking what they like, leave it blank and just say, what style of dance is your favorite? What colors are your favorites? And then maybe throwing out some ideas of adjectives like powerful, light, dark, romantic, just getting an idea of the sense of who they are as a person. I think students may be more likely to be honest when it's not something that they have to say out loud. And then this is going to be something that you can keep all year and refer to. So maybe you have a question of, what do you dislike about a costume, or what do you dislike about a dance? And leave it blank. Let them give your thoughts to you. Don't predispose them towards giving you an opinion. Another idea on this worksheet is just a question that says, how do you want a costume to make you feel? Or what makes you feel good about a costume? And this way, not only do you have some of their personal preferences so that when you go to select a costume, you have an idea, but you're getting a better sense of who this student is as a person.
Oh, you hit the nail on the head, Amelia. I love this. As children grow and develop, they are trying to discover who they are. And I think this is an amazing way to help them voice what they feel. You can give them some ideas, like you mentioned. They might not know how to describe joyful, romantic, dark. You may want to give them some example adjectives, which I think is great, but asking them how they want their costuming to make them feel is so important, because we know that some students want to be very neutral. Some really lean one way versus the other. And this is going to help you not only in future choices for dance wear and dress code, but also these costume choices. Now, we know we cannot accommodate every single want and need of every single individual in that class, but you may be able to pull this information and really use it towards as you go through the costume choices. And we know there are so many, you may know right off the bat, this is going to be one that is not for this class based on that feedback. But what an amazing opportunity for you as a studio owner and your teachers to help find a voice for what they're feeling inside.
Yes.
I love
absolutely.
that. I love that. So we talked about how to get started, and I just mentioned dress code and dancewear. Can we touch on the dancewear portion of things for just a little bit? I know we really want to focus on the costuming aspect because that is a huge portion of this, and it's a lot more extensive and in depth than the dress code for dancewear is. But let's talk about dancewear a bit, because we know that this is important, and it's also a great opportunity if you don't have a dress code yet. This may help you as you start to bring a dress code into your studio.
Yeah. So I am always an advocate of a dress code, always, because some uniformity in studies has actually been shown to help with body image. So some of that goes back to think about why your child may have to wear a uniform in school. That can create some, reduce some socioeconomic barriers and all sorts of things to help your students just feel on, equal footing with their peers. So I'm always going to be an advocate of dress code. The other thing that I really want you to think about is the costume is, of course, very, very important because it's kind of the pinnacle of the year, right? But they're actually in their dress code far more than they're ever in a costume. They're wearing that day in, day out. So you're going to find if your students are not comfortable coming to class day in and day out, do you really think they're going to stick around for recital? Maybe not. So one of the things that I just want to remind everybody of, while I do advocate for a dress code, I also advocate for keeping your students in mind. So what I mean by that is some students may not feel comfortable only wearing a leotard and tights. As a former ballerina, obviously, I still want to see their lines, but I can still see their lines when I'm teaching if I'm adding a high waist short or a dance sweater. Keeping those things in mind just as additional options. That way, the students who feel like they need or want those things have that opportunity to have those things. We also need to have the gender neutral conversation here in dancewear, giving all of your students the opportunity to choose the dancewear that's still within your dress code, that feels comfortable to them, so that they're focused on the content that they're getting in the class and the training that they're getting in the classroom versus what they look like.
Thank you for bringing that conversation to light, especially about gender neutral options and languaging around that as well. Maybe it's choice number 1, choice number 2. version number 1, version number 2, instead of the male, female, like we've done for so many years. And we know that we have a lot of our studio owner listeners who already do that. So praise to you. And we're working on really changing the languaging around that. We have a lot we want to cover on costuming. So let's move right into more of the costuming choices, education. Let's think about how we can do this, because we have tips for sizing days. We have tips for when we distribute costumes. This is our jam. This is what we love to do. So let's share all these wonderful nuggets with our audience, Amelia. Let's dive right back into costuming and talking about how to get, like, as we start to pick out these costumes, now that we know how we want them to feel and how they want to feel, how do we execute this?
Yeah. So we all know how we feel when that catalog comes in the mail. We are all so excited, and we're just flipping page by page by page, and we're excited about, what that costume looks like. I just want to remind everybody that the costume really just should augment the artistic element of the dance. That is the main point of the costume. We all know that, but I think sometimes we forget that a little bit. So let's just keep that in the forefront. So as far as costume choice education goes, I think that's one of the things why that worksheet is so important, because it brings the teacher an element of responsibility to consider every student in the class when they're selecting the costume, if you allow them to have that choice. The other thing that I really want you to consider is that the costume, think of it like wrapping paper on a gift, right? So the wrapping paper, when you receive a gift, it might make you feel a certain way if it's, your favorite color or it's really shiny. But the wrapping paper is not the most important thing. The most important thing is the content of the gift. So that's why I think it's really important not to get hung up on a costume choice. I always tell customers, don't get married on a costume choice. We always have other options. And another option may actually be a better fit for every student in your class. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk on that. Now I'm going to dive into a little bit of actual tips and tricks. So one of the things I really like to think about are your sizing days. I'm sure many of you remember, a teacher pulling out a measuring tape, and in front of all your peers, you are measured. And that can really make some students feel very other. So let's talk about a couple other things that we can do. So one thing may be sending a sizing worksheet home so that the parent can measure at home. I'm sure a lot of you do that already. We have many sizing tools available with Revolution that you can easily snip onto a worksheet and send home with your family. So that's one thing to consider. Another thing I really like to talk about is a sizing day that is actually outside of class time. So you can set appointments where your families can come in to have their child measured for their costume. Number one, your parent's going to be a little bit happier in some aspects because that class time is not being taken up with something that they don't see as education. But most importantly, it may be more comfortable for some of your students to come and have those measurements done when they're not being compared peer to peer. This is the moment where I'm going to talk about Revolution's new measuring size kit. If you haven't gotten familiar with it, I want to encourage you to get familiar with it. We would be happy to send you some. So girth is a really important size measurement, and this measuring tape is really genius because you're able to actually see what Revolution size they measure into. Why is that important? Nobody wants to hear their size called out as a number in front of their peers or really in front of anyone. So a measuring tape like that gives you an opportunity to just really eyeball that size really fast. And then you can have a spot where you write it down or your teacher writes it down, and you don't have to call out any sizes, any numbers. So I know it sounds like a shameless plug, but that measuring kit is actually really, really important and near and dear to my heart because it gives you a valuable tool.
It's a brilliant tool that we have for sure. It goes a long way, not just to help you measure and find the right sizing. It goes a huge way towards this body positivity conversation that we are having. And that's truly one of the main reasons that this was developed. We're going to post links in the show notes. So if you're wondering and you're out on a walk or you're listening in your car and you're thinking, I want to go see this, or I want to know how to get this, we make sure you check the show notes. We'll make sure that you have the links to the tools that we're working on. And I know I'm going to put this in our closing, but you've given me a great idea to create that worksheet that we've spoken about so much in this podcast already. We're going to create that and put a link to a template. So you have that for sure. Okay. Yay. So sizing days, check. Got that. We're gonna do things really well when it comes to sizing days. Okay. Now we've picked the costume, we've done the sizing, the costumes come in, and we have the costume try-on days. Oh, Amelia.
Yes.
Let's talk about this one.
Okay, so obviously these are a big deal in the life of a student, right? So we want to make this really, really fun and really, really exciting. And there's some ways that we can do that while still keeping everybody's body image in mind. So one of the things I want to talk about is Revolution costumes. They come recital ready in a garment bag and labeled, which is amazing. The reason it's amazing when we're talking about this particular conversation is that you don't have to hand costumes out by size. So one idea is consider a hang tag with a student name on it that can be reused if they're in multiple classes. You can hang the costumes on the bar in alphabetic order, not size order. That way you're not handing a costume saying, oh, Susie, small, so-and-so, medium. We really want to get away from that sort of labeling. One thing that you can also do so that they don't even see the size on a costume try-on day, go ahead and take that costume out of the bag and hand it to the student and leave the bag on the side. Let's not worry about sizing. Let's worry about how they feel in the costume. We've all had the moment where the costume gets tried on and we know the size isn't correct. Here's an opportunity for you to really change your languaging and change your conversation. So instead of walking up to the student and saying, oh, that's the wrong size for you, let's try to avoid that. That can make that student feel really, really uncomfortable. So instead, ask the student, how could you be more comfortable in this costume? What would make it more comfortable for you? Try not to single those students out. That might be something that you want to ask every single student. I know this sounds like a lot of work, but I promise you that the work is well worth the reward. Another thing that you can talk about, so we talked about sizing days. It could be that you set appointments for costume try-on. That's an opportunity. Maybe this is a way where you can start to engage some of your higher level students to help you, almost like an internship. Start teaching them the ropes and have them come assist you on costume try-on days. One of the things I really want to point out here is that when you have a class and they're all in there together, just like a measuring day and you're calling out sizes, if you're doing a group costume fitting day, there's something that you may have forgotten from your days as a dancer, is that when they are compared peer to peer in a group like that, that student loses a little bit of their autonomy in that costume try-on day. So you may not find that these tips work for you, but think about that. Think about how you get your students to have a little bit more control in their costuming that day so that they feel like themselves. One last point about costume try-on days. I really want you to consider using some different wording. So this really goes into that true meaning of body positivity and what we mean by the word positive. When they put their costumes on, try to avoid phrases like, oh, you look so good, or even, you look pretty. Maybe that student doesn't feel like they want to look pretty. Instead, talk about how the costume really fits well with the choreography and use other positive phrases around the content that you're building in the classroom, the training that they're getting out of it, and not just how the costume looks.
I love that. I'm learning so much along the way as well, Amelia, even though I try to think that I'm positive in my languaging, but I am one of those people that is very guilty about saying how good somebody looks. Oh, you look really good. This looks really good on you. I've learned, I just got back from traveling for 10 days. I complimented so many people on their clothing. Your scarf is a beautiful color, or that those pants are just an amazing shade of purple, whatever it is, the languaging that we use, I want people to feel really good about the choices that they have. Now that color purple may not be anything that I ever choose for me, but that person is rocking it and they feel amazing. And that's what really matters. So this conversation so far has been such a learning opportunity, and it's been great. We have one more point. So if you have stuck with us this long, we have one more point to talk about, and then we're going to wrap up. So thank you for being here. As long as you have, Amelia, these nuggets are wonderful. Let's talk about the last big thing, which is the picture day.
Yeah, so we have gotten through sizing days. We have now gotten through costume try-on days. So now we're at picture days. So we're almost at the pinnacle of recital. And I think a lot of us just think about picture days, obviously, as a source of profit and a way to, get everybody in a room and happy about a costume. But there's something I really want you to think about. So recent research has actually suggested that 1 in 5 teens avoid being in situations where their photo is taken because they're self-conscious about their appearance. I know that sounds very hard to believe given the world of social media these days, but I want you to remember that when they are taking a selfie on social media, they have control over that image. And when they are taking a picture in a group setting, they have relinquished that control. So I'm not saying not to do picture days. I am always an advocate for running a studio like a business and earning money, because you cannot keep doing what you're doing if you don't. But let's take some of these things into account as far as picture days. Do we consider reframing picture days as something that's not mandatory? Or do we stop worrying about group photos for your teens? I don't know what that answer looks like yet, and that answer might look different for different studios. But just remember that we need to have picture days as something where everybody feels really, really empowered, and that we make sure that they feel empowered in their costume choice that day, just like they do on costume try-on day, just like they do the day of performance.
I love that. I know one of the things that I have seen a lot happening with picture days is a lot of candid shots that happen behind the scenes as well. And I think that is a fabulous way to start getting them to feel extremely comfortable before they even set foot onto that paper or, the backdrop and in front of the camera and lights. Our photographers tend to do a really great job of having an extra person there or in between shots, taking these amazingly beautiful, candid shots of the dancers who just feel awesome. They're just rocking the costumes. They're feeling really good because we've taken everything into account all the way through for those costume choices. Amelia, we're going to close out right now because I know we have left our listeners with so many things to think about. And I would love for you to just close this out in your words because this topic is so important to you. It's important to me as well. What can we do to just put everybody at ease, make them feel really empowered to use these body positivity languaging in their core values all the way through their choices? Let's close it out by some very positive words around body positivity.
Yeah. So here's the thing is that none of this is a judgment. We all have room for improvement. We all have ways that we can really empower our students and, to be honest, each other. And so I just want to say, start small, pick your priorities and maybe just pick one thing that you want to really focus on to start changing. And I'm willing to bet that if you change that one thing, other things will follow. And before you know it, your entire staff will have this mentality around reframing a conversation to help your students have a very, very healthy body image. Like I said earlier, let's not get so hung up on the costume. Let's get hung up on how it makes your dancers feel when they're wearing that costume. And the most important thing is the training and the education and the content and the choreography. The costume just augments all of that. So, I just feel really passionately about this topic because body issues will happen. I'm 40. I still have them myself, but it's how we handle those body issues for those children and those teens it's just so important.
I am so grateful for your time, your passion, and your education for our listeners today. These conversations will keep going. We're going to give you a path in the show notes to explore further. If you're not a member of Dance Studio Owner yet, we want you to be part of our group. We have more podcasts and more trainings like this coming your way. So we're going to give you also the path to get in touch with us to continue these conversations because they are so incredibly important. We are here for you. We are 100% behind you. We want you to be successful and we want your students to just feel amazing. Amelia, thank you again so much for your time and talent. This is a wonderful topic and this is amazing. I feel so grateful to be able to bring this to our listeners today. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jill.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Dance Studio 411. Visit us online at dancestudio411.com for more great resources and to submit a question for a future episode. Our number one goal is to help you build a successful dance studio business and keep your passion for dance alive.